All right, let's do this. So, welcome back to another video in the series Romeo CRT 2023 review. The purpose of this channel is to go through all of Romeo's content from 2023 and to look at each trade that he's published and try to learn a little bit from each trade. Not all trades are as interesting and drama-filled as this one, or not drama-filled, but this one's got a social angle to it because this trade, the origination of this trade, is actually a response to a stance or a bias or analytical call that was made by ICT. Michael, ICT is the theoretical predecessor of Romeo. Romeo uses ICT concepts like turtle soup, FVGs, order blocks, the quarterly swings, there's so much ICT in Romeo. Now, to compare ICT and Romeo, Romeo is like the smartphone, whereas ICT is like the rotary phone. It's definitely an evolutionary step forward, in my opinion, to use turtle soup and CRT to trade the markets rather than just the stock ICT concepts. So here, November 9th in 2022, which I apologize, it's ancient history at this point, but still there's some important lessons. And guess what, guys? If you saw the chart of Bitcoin this week, the chart of Bitcoin this week was actually an analog to this time. Now, I'm not saying that this is the bottom in Bitcoin, but I just want to point out that if you take this 14-week period or so and you copy and paste it next to the 14-week period we just saw with Bitcoin ending in a weekly candle that looked like this, a huge bullish weekly candle, it's very, very similar. In fact, other people on Twitter or X have been pointing out this same price analog, historical price analogy. So then Romeo on January 7th of 2023, so a few months after that, he's responding to somebody else, but he says, I'm sorry, I never got into what ICT originally said. So ICT famously was bearish on Bitcoin. He still might be bearish on Bitcoin. He thinks Bitcoin will go to zero. Bitcoin could go to 500,000 or it could go to zero, right? Only the chart will really tell, and only price action will tell. But famously at this point, ICT tweets Bitcoin. So stop me if you've heard this one before. 10K. So in other words, he's thinking that ICT is essentially falling for the turtle soup, which just goes to show how genius from a market psychology, a behavioral finance perspective, how genius turtle soups are. So this is a bullish turtle soup, but what ICT reads this as, and he puts this tweet, we can go into FX replay and look at exactly when he tweeted this. His tweet is very much at the close of this candle. So he's basically being tricked into thinking that this is a bearish continuation sign and just go full port bearish. I don't think ICT actually traded this. I could be wrong, but I don't think ICT was actually putting any kind of skin in the game on this one. Romeo, however, I would suspect was actually trading his Bitcoin take at this point. So, after much accumulation, which I'm sure disappointed ICT, on the very last candle. So this just goes to show the timing of all this. I wouldn't even call this candle part of the 2023 model in terms of peak manipulation. There's something more going on here, and I really want to use this video as a chance to unpack what is going on. Because if you can understand how Romeo was able to get bullish and basically predict this large weekly bullish candle for the next candle, then you can understand you can understand last week's Bitcoin price action in terms of, if you look at go look at a chart of Bitcoin and go look at the week ending August 21st of 2026, and you'll see the same exact configuration. So if you can understand that, then you can catch these insane upside moves in Bitcoin. Romeo, of course, tweets back 32K before 10K, unless it pulls a Luna, which is a direct reference to the ICT tweet. This was Romeo's screenshot, by the way. So Romeo had taken a screenshot. It looks like a tablet or some kind of like, this looks like, or it could have been a laptop screenshot, but this wide format screenshot is Romeo's. This is from Romeo's 2023 content that he shared out with everybody. So yeah, Romeo has annotations on the chart here. I'll get to those before I jump into FX replay. But Romeo has actually annotated this low right here, this key level rather, as a turtle soup, a weekly turtle soup. This is definitely higher time frame than weekly. I would say that weekly would almost be your signaling time frame on this. This is actually quarterly time frame. So that's where we're going to be when I switch into FX replay. Is check this out. This is the chart of Bitcoin up until the point here. This is starting on, right pretty much at the beginning of the year, January 2023. And you can see that this is actually a Romeo 2023 model when you look at it, with every candle being a 3-month or 1 quarter chart. So this is the quarterly chart in Bitcoin. So here's the origination candle: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And with Q4 2022 being the peak manipulation. There's a macro person named Michael Howell. Michael Howell, his analytical firm is called Cross Border Capital. He published a book in 2020, I believe, called Capital Wars. He talks about the liquidity cycle, and it's a 65 to 68 month cycle, and it has a trough or a low point every 65 months. And in late October of 2022, which was in Q4 of 2022, was the liquidity low point. He sees Bitcoin as an asset that responds well to the global liquidity cycle, like the dynamics of the global liquidity cycle. And so he says that Bitcoin's basically like exponential liquidity. It's sensitive to liquidity in an exponential sense, and it actually operates on a 6-week lag. So if you see the global liquidity cycle bottom, then you can look to get long Bitcoin following 6 weeks or 6 weeks later, and that's exactly what happens here. So I'll go to the weekly chart. So in late October of 2022. You have essentially like a banking crisis, a sovereign debt crisis. It was terrible for Forex. If you're Forex bulls or if you're a pension fund in the UK, it was all sorts of nasty stuff happening. So then that was the trough in liquidity, and then 6 weekly candles after that is here, and that is the trough of liquidity. In other words, what Michael Howell's liquidity index showed was you got more liquidity feeding back into the system. So Romeo probably, I'm not sure if Romeo's really read up on Michael Howell, but that just goes to show how powerful Romeo's technical approach to technical analysis is. So going back to the quarterly chart, if this is peak manipulation, right? It's kind of an if-then statement. If this is the peak manipulation candle, right, then you'd expect January to be, the quarter starting in January, so Q1 to be distribution. You'd expect Q2 to be distribution and Q3 to be distribution. And you'd expect that initial move higher on the quarterly chart to, well, ideally, and if this were on the lower time frames, you'd expect it to hit the equilibrium of this range, which is 42,000, right? Now, Romeo's target was 32,000. So why was Romeo's target 32,000? Well, on the higher time frames, you can look for perhaps a monthly CRT, right? And so look at this model. This large monthly candle, this large down close monthly candle, the high of this candle is just below 32,000. So that's why Romeo, so if you might remember his tweet, he said 32K before 10K. That's why he had that's why he had that as his target. So there's your monthly. So in other words, this whole thing is this super elaborate monthly pause CRT, with January being the culmination of the pause CRT. So in other words, like there's your CRT low. Okay. And you're allowed 2 down close candles. Right? If you're going to like look at that as a key level. Okay. Now it sounds crazy to say like, okay, well, we're going to wait 2 months, 2 down close months, and then we'll still have this as a viable target here for a CRT entry, which is pretty crazy. It fits in the context of a quarterly 2023 model the best, in my opinion. Now, what are you looking for when you look for a quarterly CRT? Well, once you're tapped into the key level and the timing is correct. So in other words, how come this wasn't the bottom in Bitcoin? I think it's about time, right? I think that quote unquote they were waiting for the new year to start, because if you think about it, this whole thing became a 1-year CRT, right? In other words, this whole thing is operating with respect to the yearly candle. So if you're going to wait for a bottom to occur, you're waiting for this entire bearish yearly candle to close. That just an opinion with that one. So this whole thing is obviously really nuanced, and you definitely want to take a lot of a nuanced approach. Now let's go and look at on the weekly chart, and you can actually see a weekly market structure shift occur. So obviously there's a weekly market structure shift here. There's a weekly market structure shift here, right? So why are we ignoring these? Again, we need to wait for the new year to begin and the new quarter to begin. So a new quarter has began just following a weekly market structure shift. And the other thing you're looking for is it's kind of that A to Z approach where you're left, this high leaves liquidity, right? So this is one more false market structure shift with this wick, right? It leaves liquidity above as well. And then, so it's actually like inducing bears in as well, because it's kind of giving you this bearish entry in this weekly fair value gap. But then price hits, we'll call it like this weekly order block, and it just stalls. And I think the pause is just as important. And if you look, we can go on Brave and look at this week's price action, but it's just as important. I'm gonna go to the daily chart, and I'm gonna go right to January 7th, which is the day that Romeo tweeted that. So it was a Saturday, January 7th. And of course, the Saturday anticipates the Sunday open, the beginning of the new candle. And so if you look on the daily chart, this is all the information that he needs to be bullish on Bitcoin. So, you can get down and you can go down to the 4-hour time frame, and you can go, well, predicting the next weekly candle, do we have cause to be bullish on the 4-hour chart, right? Do we think that perhaps this will be a weekly CRT, right? And we do, right? Because this is a 4-hour model number 1 right here. Okay. And the 4-hour model number 1 is like insanely respected, right? So if that's the body of that aggressive down close candle, then we have, several stabs, no close belows at all. And so that you'll have a candle 3 dynamic when you do get into the open of the weekly. You'll have a candle number 3 dynamic. So this is like weekly candle number 1 down close candle, or essentially a doji. weekly candle number 2, it's an inside bar, right? Because it's the low of weekly candle number 2 doesn't get beyond the low of candle number 1. We might even end up with an SMT with ETH. You could check. And then there's weekly candle number 3. Similar dynamic from this week too, if we look. So let's just zoom out and let's look at his distribution now. So this is also a monthly CRT at this point. And it's not quite a 3 candle CRT, but it follows the same structure where you have candle number 1 is very, very large and a very, very wide range. Candle number 2 is like consolidative and like in a doji. And then candle number 3 begins the distribution. It begins the distribution, right? So from a CRT perspective, this ends up being like a more, not a pause CRT, but definitely like a multiple candle CRT. Like it does take us a number of months, I believe, to get us all the way up to, I'm sorry, it wasn't even this candle. It was this candle right here. Yeah, so of course it's a pause CRT. Yeah. Because I mean, it's taken us like many months just to form, what should be a doji, a point of reversal. So let's go, let's go back to the quarterly and we'll just go as fast as we can because I've got to cut this video off now. I've got to go. But yeah, so this is the performance of the first quarter. Going back to the weekly chart, you can see that that's that characteristic bottom that people pointed out was very similar to this past week in crypto. So this is where we are now. Do I expect this candle after? You'll have to watch my video on planning the week to come that I'm going to release tomorrow. So going back, let's just watch this on the weekly chart. Here's Romeo's target, 32K. We do get there. Obviously, if this were like a lower time frame model, like if we were watching this on the 1 hour chart, as far as if every single quarter was a 1 hour candle, you would expect a lot more out of this. But the thing about higher time frame and lower time frame is you have to treat you don't have to, but it's beneficial to understand that you're not going to have the same timing considerations on the higher time frame. Time gets divided up differently on the higher time frames. The other thing is especially with crypto, is oftentimes they say that 40% of all crypto bull moves are encapsulated within like only 8 trading days, and then all the other trading days are essentially like ranging, and you can pick these candles, like it's like this day, this day, this day, and so it's that to me says pause CRT. Like it says you have to be incredibly patient with the way that bullish price action happens in crypto. I think part of that's due to like the high beta, like the high volatility. It just makes for these like super dramatic plunges into sell side liquidity, and it makes for equally in crazy rips off the bottom into buy side. But not necessarily consistency. So yeah, we're pretty much getting to the end of the projected time frame, right? So in other words, going back to the quarterly time frame, as far as a 2023 model, this 10 candle or 10 quarterly candle setup, I would essentially call this like fail, right, on the lower time frame. This is a lower time frame fail, right? Because we don't even get to equilibrium. But analytically, you're correct. And because this is crypto, and because it is literally a 5-year or 5-year plus 65 to 68 month liquidity cycle, then it's a success. It's a success because this little analysis will expire, but as it expires, that leads you to another 2023 model to get long and stay long. And so you know that we will essentially have a pause CRT of this entire yearly candle. So the entire fat down close candle that was 2022 yearly candle, we have a pause CRT. 2023, 2024, 2025, and 2020 in 2025, I think it was, that we hit all-time highs, much higher than that swing high there. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to my video. This one was an exciting one. Oh, I just want to close this on like a more philosophical note. The thing that really appeals to me about Romeo's systems is that, and his approach to understanding price action, is that it is predictive on the higher time frame. I mean, this is the clearest example that you have. I'll go back to PowerPoint because this is going to make my point exactly. That you could follow Romeo, you could follow Dodgy's on my mind just because I just made a Please Fix Thanks video. You could follow ICT and just use like the exact systems that ICT shares out. But it's Romeo that leads you to the higher time frame setups that are gonna help you the most, because as you go from quarterly to monthly to weekly to daily to 4 hour to 1 hour on your analysis in order to execute day in and day out when you're trading, that's going to be the most important thing that you'll have.